Hi everyone, my name is Osler Ortez. I am the corn and emerging crops specialist at Ohio State. I have been in this role for the past 4 years, and part of my research work at other institutions, University of Nebraska, got me going on this topic that I am presenting to this audience today. I appreciate the invitation from the Crop Protection Network. That is a program, a platform that I truly appreciate, and I am sure many others in the community do as well. What are we talking about today? Well, when it comes to crop protection, there are different issues that year after year, farmers, practitioners, researchers have to fight about. One of them, in my experience, abnormal ear development in corn. What abnormal ear development in corn looks like, you have some few examples here. This is a picture from the Crop Science and Agronomy News magazine. Um, that's something that we worked quite intensively for the past 5 to 7 years. And I will be presenting a little bit of what we know and what we have been able to advance in this space. So we will be looking a little bit into the what, the when, and the whys. Background to this work, how did we get here? In 2016, there were reports of abnormal ear development, first in Nebraska and also later on from other states in the region. Those states are highlighted in blue, like Texas, Colorado, Kansas, Iowa, and Illinois. That is in addition to Nebraska, highlighted here in orange. Those reports came right in the middle of the season, August 2016. These reports were coming from farmer fields, crop consultants, seed industry, farmers themselves. They were reaching out to the University of Nebraska and reporting some of these issues. So that got a few people on board and started to look into this phenomenon that at this point was widespread. What we knew since the beginning is that we understood that abnormal ears are likely the results of interactions. That is to say that there is not necessarily a single element that we can um, blame on. Rather, there are a couple or a few things that had to happen in order to end up with an outcome like this. Nonetheless, that was just general perspective. Specific causes were yet to be understood. Specific causes, in many cases, were yet to be studied. And that was a big task moving forward. So we took a little bit of that task and we started looking into this. Something that we realized moving in that direction is that, well, more than 100 years of research in corn, or really more than 10,000 years of crop domestication in corn, we still have issues that need answers. We still face challenges that can make us think twice. And there was a research gap, there was a research need that we were willing to take on. What was being reported in 2016? Here are some pictures of what those issues look like. Multiple ears on the same node, barbell ears with damage to the cobs, short husks. Those are ears that are exposed to factors externally like insects, disease, and weather. So these are the kind of ear abnormalities that were affecting farmer fields in that year, 2016. Our next step was look at a review of the literature. What is the knowledge that is already available, and how can we go from there? The next step that I will be talking today, we looked at characterization of the abnormal ear symptoms. I will discuss that. We completed on-farm surveys to characterize the issue that year, 2016. And we wrapped things up by looking at small plot trials, testing G by E by M factors, looking into what cultural practices or what kinds of hybrids or what kinds of environments are conducive to abnormal ears. And finally, I will wrap up with a summary. What are the implications of these issues? These issues have clear implications and obvious implications. First and foremost, there is a productivity effect, right? If we see at these pictures, that's not going to produce anything close to a good-looking normal ear. In addition to productivity, there are profitability concerns. If you are not producing enough, you are not getting enough return, and in many cases, you might be losing money. And then there are sustainability concerns also. If you are targeting 200 bushel corn in a field that gets heavily affected by the issues pictured here, and you end up only getting 100 bushels of corn, that means in that scenario, you ended up using twice the nitrogen, twice the irrigation, twice the inputs for something that really didn't make up what you were expecting. So lots of implications at all levels here. So what was next? We needed to go back to the basics. This is information that is publicly available. All the different sections that I am presenting today, they are already published. There are links for access to those. For the sake of time, I cannot go into a lot of detail today. Rather, I will do a quick overview of those different projects that we completed, that knowledge that we were able to gain and to advance. By no means we have solved the abnormal ear puzzle. These abnormal ear issues happen year after year after year. They are sporadic and random in nature. So just be aware that we improve understanding. We are not yet to the end, and I really don't know that we will ever be completed answering questions related to abnormalities. So the first project or the first task that we took was looking at which conditions really affect ear formation, yield, and ear abnormalities in corn. We summarized that into a review paper. And what we were able to summarize there is abnormal ears are the result of stress for a good chunk of the equation. A stress that can be either biotic or abiotic. So that's one starting point. That is one trigger to the issues. Really understanding when the stress happens is very important relative to the formation of ears and grain yield. If we look at this graphic here on the right, you see the all the way a full season in corn from planting to physiological maturity. And the arrows underneath are denoting the different processes that a corn plant undergoes from planting to harvest or physiological maturity. Some of those key events are highlighted here in red. This is all important because as we think about yield components, ear formation, and yield formation, there are things that we are really looking after that we need to protect. First one is the ear number per unit of area. We want to have an optimum number of ears in the acre. Kernel number per ear, how many kernels develop in every ear in that field. And the last one, towards the end of the season, kernel weight. We don't only want a high level or a high number of kernels, we also want kernels that have good quality, good weight, that have a more meaningful contribution to final yield. In this scenario, if there is an stress that comes early in the season over here, that can really affect some of those early factors, early processes. If it is something that happens later in the season over here or here, that still has effects on other processes or other elements in that yield formation process. That is to say that really, when we think about corn and its growth and development, we have exposure, risk exposure to these kinds of stressors that can really put things going in this wrong direction. What else did we look with that? Key findings that we were able to summarize. Extreme weather can be or is one of the big factors. Extreme weather like drought stress, heat stress can really affect the crop at different times in the season. And with that, the response can be different and can translate into some abnormal yields. In some cases, if we have limited solar radiation, that can be a factor too. There is research work in the literature that has shown that reducing the solar radiation or the radiation intercepted by the crop, it can really affect yield and also lead to some abnormalities. There are also growth regulator issues. There can be growth regulator issues, too much or too little, not enough. That can also put things out of whack and lead into abnormalities. A second takeaway there was that primary ear abortion seems to correlate based on what we see in the literature. The abortion of primary ears high in the plant canopy and the development of secondary ears lower in the plant canopy, that seems to correlate with the abnormal ear phenomena. And the other thing was there are interactions between all of it, ear formation, yield, and abnormalities. So that's a complex issue to study on itself. And by the way, I should say that the research work that has been completed in the literature regarding this topic, abnormal ears, is limited. We are fortunate to have some level of research that has been done in the past, but really it's not like looking at nitrogen response in corn. You have tons of experiments and publications that have looked at that question. When it comes to a topic like this, abnormal ears, really we are limited on the work that has been done. Why? Well, like I said at the beginning, these issues can be very sporadic and random in nature. It's a complex situation to study, and I will be sharing a little bit more of the whys here in the next few slides. So what else did we do? We went ahead and we needed to provide a benchmark of characterization of these abnormal ears. So that's the second output that we had with this work, a characterization of these abnormal ear symptoms. You might think or you might want to put them all in one bucket. I have had conversations with farmers or industry representatives where I have the perception, I get the perception that abnormal ears are being all looped into one bucket, like a single issue, single event. And that's really not appropriate here. When we think about abnormal ears, the complexities are there. And with this second project, what we did, we went ahead and characterized all of the abnormal ear symptoms that have been reported in the past, let's say, 100 years, roughly. Those reports oftentimes from extension publications across the US, in some cases outside of the US as well. But again, limited research really has been done. So let's look at those symptoms. We characterize 10 historical traditional symptoms that have been reported in the past. And later, we characterize the three most recent symptoms of concern, which is what got us going, the last three. The first 10 symptoms that have been historically reported and that we have some level of understanding about: tassel ears. This is a picture here on the top left. Second one, arrested ears on your top right. Fasciated ears on the bottom left, and pinched ears on the bottom right. I will not go into too much detail now, but later we have a table where we summarize the symptoms, the causal factors, and the developmental timing when those symptoms developed. So that's a pretty good summary that we will have there. And by the way these are presented now, they are coming in approximately order of development from early to later down here. Those are the first four symptoms. Let's look at the next four. So we are going now into blunt ears. Sometimes these are called beer can ears. Beer can, one of the short ones, not the tall ones. Just pretty much these ears are short and probably the height of a regular small can. That's one symptom there. The next one up, incomplete kernel set. You have kernels scattered in those ears. You have gaps where you didn't have kernel formation. Next one, silk ball ears. That's when the silks do not develop properly, and you have these kinds of issues where the silk direction and extension outside of the husk is not appropriate. So you get issues like this, and then you might end up with something like this in the tips of those ears, or it could be in other sections of the ear also. Next one, we have banana ears. Those are ears that have the shape of a banana, really. Multiple factors that are summarized later. The last two from the historically reported abnormalities, we have zipper ears and we have tip back ears. By the way, this past 2025 season, here in my personal experience, here in the campus where I am located in Ohio, we had quite a bit of this. We were running a abnormal ear trial and we quantified roughly 20-25% of tip back ears and zipper ears in a single field. So that was quite a bit, and a lot of this, in our case, was driven by a dry, very dry pollination and grain filling season. So those are the last two that have been traditionally reported. For the sake of time, also, I cannot go into all of the detail that is presented in this table, but really all of those 10 symptoms that I just shown with in a graphic way with pictures, they are summarized here. Symptoms 1 through 10. The second column is summarizing causal factors and look at the possible word. Again, the literature is limited and this information is based off as much as was available. So, and the last column here is the postulated development timing. Some of these timings are pretty precise. Some of them might be an approximation. Again, this due to the limited body of literature that we have on the topic. Possible causal factors, you have things all the way from seeding rates, you have genetics, mutants, you have cold stress, you have non-ionic surfactants, you have sulfonylurea herbicides when applied off-label, non-ionic surfactants applied off-label as well. You have stressors that are either chemical or environmental. You can have management practices that also contribute to these issues. There can be drought stress, there are susceptible genetics, there can be silk damage, by insects. There can be pollination issues. There can be a nutrient deficit, herbicide injury, limited solar radiation. You have severe weather like windstorms, a stink bug injury. What else do we see here? Kernel abortion. So all of these are possible drivers of abnormalities. And the important piece here is that if we are thinking about an arrested ear, there is some understanding about what the causal factor is, and when is the timing of for that to develop. So that's the reason why we cannot put abnormal ears all into one bucket. Rather, we need to look at them separately because there can be different explanations as well as different timings. Moving on, what else did we get? Those are the 10 traditionally reported symptoms before. I am now pivoting to the 3 symptoms that became a large concern in that year 2016, which this is the trigger to what got us going, developing new research, adding new research. The first symptom here is multi-ears. The multi-ear issue is when you have more than one ear on the same node, on the same shank. In this case, you have 2 ears in the same, you have 2 or 3 here, 4 over here, and this one was up to 7 or 8 ears in the very same node. These are pictures that I collected walking cornfields in the state of Nebraska as I was completing my PhD program. Next symptom here is barbell ears. Barbell ears, you have kernel gaps or grain gaps in the base of the ear, in the middle of the ear, or on the tip of the ear. It's not only kernel gaps, but also there is a very drastic reduction on the diameter of those cobs, of those corn cobs, which this kind of suggests that there is an abrupt source of stress going on that is potentially leading to this kind of extremes. This is really an extreme. And finally, the last one was short husks. This one we gotta be a little bit careful because some genetics, some hybrids that we have in the market today, they will have a tendency to have 5% of shortage in the husk, 10% maybe loose husks as well, which can be a positive characteristic if it helps grain dry down. Now, those are not the kinds that we are referring when we talk about short husks. When we talk about short husks, we are looking at ears that are exposed more than 20% of that ear. In this case here, let's say we have 40, 50% exposure, 60% exposure in that ear. Here is more of a 70%, probably 70%. And this one here really is like a 90%. See that husk that never developed. These ears are intact. We did not touch them. We only took pictures of them. So we did not peel over any husks here. This is just simply the way they developed. Again, to clarify, it can be normal to have little bit of exposure in the tip of the ear, which can help grain dry down, but it is not normal to have 90%, 50%, 30% exposure in an ear and have that grain susceptible to the environment. In a similar way, we went ahead and also postulated causal factors for these last 3 symptoms as well as developmental timing. Multi-years per node ranging from environmental stress like cold, low seeding rates scenarios, specific hybrids can be more prompt to the issue than others, and also damage to the primary ear. Timing of development, these tend to develop earlier in the season based on the growth and development processes that we know for corn. The second symptom, barbell ears, temperature stress, limited solar radiation, growth regulators, imbalances like ethylene, that's a natural occurring plant growth regulator. We have hormonal issues in the plants. There can be a chemical application factor, again, genetics and damage to primary ear. This happens a little bit later in the season, slightly later in the season. And finally, the short husk issue that we think that can be explained by a short-term stress, heat or drop, followed by big swings in temperature. That's what we have seen in fields or in some of the literature. Um, so suboptimum conditions rapidly changing into optimum or better conditions. High speed winds, genetics as well. This symptom develops later in the season, B18 to flowering, R1, silking. All right, so that pretty much sets the stage for what we were looking after. And again, a lot of the work that I will be presenting from this point forward is actually looking at those last three symptoms. This is a project that we published looking at after working with really farmer fields. So we went to farmers fields in Nebraska in that same year, 2016. These fields were reporting to have high levels of abnormalities of those three last abnormalities. We went ahead, a group of us got together, we collected samples, hundreds, if not thousands of samples, and we tried to put some understanding to the issue. So this work was done in 15 Nebraska farmer fields. Those farmer fields, most of them were heavily affected with abnormalities, some of them not as much. It was during the 2016 crop season. These concerns came from farmers and industry crop consultants. Our university response was characterize the issue, put some numbers to it, and move forward with strategic research. The highlighted section here in orange is where those 15 farmer fields were located. And again, we were focusing, or the main reports were for multi-ears, barbell ears, and short husks. What did we learn from that field survey? 15 farmer fields. We learned that we ended up grouping those fields in two categories. We grouped all of the plants. We collected plant samples. We evaluated ears in all of those plant samples. And at the end of the assessment, 78% of the ears that we collected randomly in those affected fields, it was 78%. And about 22% on average were abnormal ears. Average is kind of a tricky word here because you might think, well, 22% is not too bad. Maybe. But if you look at independent fields that we were evaluating, there were independent fields that had up to 49% of abnormal ears. That is, every other plant had one abnormal ear. That is an issue. That's really, really, really an issue. And I will show a little bit of yield data here in a second. What about the placement of those ears? In terms of placement, we were able to see that most of the abnormalities that we were documenting from these surveys, those abnormal ears were placed lower in the canopy, lower in the plant canopy, maybe one node below. Whether, on the other hand, normal ears were placed higher in the canopy, maybe one node above. So there was a segregation there that we see on this graphic. And finally, you might be pondering about grain yield, how grain yield differs between normal ears on the brown column versus abnormal ears in the orange columns. There is a drastic difference in yield between a normal ear and an abnormal ear. Approximately, there is anywhere between 35 to 91% of yield loss in a given year in a given plant. So if you think about losing 50% of the yield with abnormal ears and 50% of your plants have abnormal ears in a field, that adds up to quite a bit of a yield drop. And that yield drop will translate into very relevant financial implications also. So we don't want that. This work really helped us to understand that, hey, there is an issue that we owe to work. It was a confirmation that the issue, it was not simply an aesthetic concern or a random sporadic concern. In this case, when you have fields with half of the plants affected with abnormal ears and each of those plants losing more than half the yield, you really realize this is a problem that we should be working as. So what was the next step from that? Well, we were getting confirmation that our initial hypothesis of genetics, environment, and management interactions all contributing to the issue, we got confirmation that that was likely the case. If we think about those susceptible, we have seen already that there are susceptible hybrids. There needs to be oftentimes there is an environmental factor like an stress factor, and a storm, drought period, cold period, wet period, and there are management practices or cultural practices that we put into those fields that maybe can also contribute to the issue. Think about the crop disease triangle. You need to have the three elements for a disease to thrive. In this case, abnormal ears, you need to have these three elements for abnormal ear development to develop. So there needs to be a susceptible hybrid, there needs to be a conducive environmental factor, and there needs to be also a management practice that was perhaps suboptimum for that crop. Let's think of a too high of a seeding rate, too low of a seeding rate, too early of a planting date. I planted 1st of April instead of waiting for my optimum 1st of May. So all of this can contribute to the issue. And when the issue shows up, there is a yield drop that we are having to work with. So moving on, we wanted to add more elements to this, more research to this question, G by E by M. So we designed two new experiments, two new projects working at university research farms at the University of Nebraska from the Lincoln campus. The first trial, it was a field trial for 2 field seasons, 4 different locations in the States. So those adds up to 8 independent trials looking at the same question. And the question was, does hybrid environment and seeding rate matter when it comes to abnormal ear development? And I will give you the key takeaways from that work. First, we confirm statistically through field research data that yes, the genetics, the environment, and the seeding rate management interacted and drove abnormal ears either lower or higher. Something that we also learned in this process, in 2019, we had approximately 11% of ear abnormalities. And in 2018, we had roughly 5% of ear abnormalities. So kind of a low number, but when we think about those interactions, even in a low number, in a low incidence of abnormalities, 5% of the plants only were affected. Even in that scenario, we were picking up those interactions. We were picking up that hybrid selection matters. We were picking up that seeding rate decisions matter. There were 5 times higher yields when in scenarios with fewer abnormalities. So there is a segregation, clear segregation there. When you have a lot of abnormalities in a plot, your yield drops. When you have less abnormalities in a plot, your yield goes up as much as 5 times higher. There was a variable hybrid response to seeding rates, as we might expect. So in this trial, we were testing, I believe it was 8 different hybrids, 4 of them susceptible to abnormalities based on field observations, 4 of them resistant to abnormalities based on what we knew from before. And we were also testing 5 seeding rates: optimum, high, high, low, low, and the extremes are never good. If you go to a too low seeding rate, you pick up some abnormalities. If you go to too high seeding rate, you pick up some abnormalities. All of that to say that hybrid selection, good hybrid selection, and finding and working with optimum seeding rates can really help to mitigate these corn ear abnormalities moving into the future. That's a basic ground there. A similar experiment that we follow up with, similar in structure to the one I just discussed. We were not only interested on knowing or learning about if seeding rate is a factor, we also wanted to know, is planting date a factor? So we went ahead and established a new set of trials, 2018 through 2020. Those were 3 years at 2 different university farms in Nebraska, in eastern Nebraska. This is what the plot layout looked like. We had crops that were planted early in April, let's say mid-April, early May, late May, or even early June. I can't remember exactly what the dates were, but we had a planting date range from early April through early June, and everything in between. We were interested to know if the planting day 1 in early April was more conducive to abnormalities, or vice versa, if the planting day 4 in early June was more or less conducive to abnormalities. Key findings from this work: there were interactions all over the place. We were also testing, similar to the experiment before, we were also testing susceptible hybrids and resistant hybrids to ear abnormalities based off field observations in previous years. We had 3 susceptible hybrids, 3 resistant hybrids in this case. We had approximately, between all of the years and locations, we had approximately 7% of abnormalities overall. Again, it's also a relatively low number. And even at that low number, we were always able to pick up consistently significant effects from the hybrid, from the year or the location, or most importantly, from the planting date. So there were interactions among the 3 factors. In this case, we had 4 times higher yields in plots that had the least number of abnormalities. And the opposite is true. What we take away from this final project here is that hybrid selection and cultural practices like planting dates can help us to mitigate these abnormalities. That's something that we ought to consider moving into the future. And by the way, that hybrid selection element, that's one of the most important decisions that we take at the farm level. Not only hybrid selection is important for ear abnormality purposes, there are implications that go far beyond that. One of them, disease tolerance, right? We want to have genetics that can do a good job keeping up with disease pressures at the different locations. Issues like ear abnormalities, we want to have a high yield potential, we want to have good crop standability that doesn't go down when a storm passes by. So hybrid selection is really, really one of the big takeaways of this work. Environmentally, we cannot do much. We need to work with it. But in terms of management practices, yes, we also propose that there are things that we can do to mitigate these abnormalities. The impact of abnormal ears is really dependent on the frequency and the severity of those symptoms. Meaning, if you have only 5% abnormalities of short husks and the severity is only 5%, that probably is not relevant. But if you have 50% abnormalities with 50% of short husks, that can really be a big, big problem. The selection of resistant hybrids or stronger hybrids that are not conducive to abnormalities, and also matching that with the appropriate management practices are critical moving forward. We also learned through this process that some of the plant morphological characteristics, such as ear placement in the canopy, ear placement in the plant, whether it's higher placement versus lower placement, we see that there is a correlation and it can serve as a diagnostic tool when we look at normal versus abnormal ears. And finally, we need to think about back to the disease triangle. Abnormal ears also have a very similar analogy here. You need to have a susceptible hybrid. You need to have a conducive environmental condition, and you need to have a conducive or suboptimum, let's call it suboptimum management practice, that when all these three come together in a sensitive period of the crop, you can end with a chaotic field with abnormal ears. Those are our main takeaways that we have up to this point. The topic itself is not going anywhere. We are still doing work on this space, and we look forward to continue sharing new findings as they become available. Thank you.